Art doesn't make a video game, but it is one of the bedrocks, the keystones of a video game. Art, animations, they are some of the very first things you will notice. And for SCHiM, one of the very first things I noticed was how delightful the game looked, how the animations flowed beautifully. For me, there's something about a pristine animation that does inherently make me feel good. And in the trailers of SCHiM, they really pull that off with an art style and animation flow that really combined together to make a little bit of a spectacle. And that's what put it on my radar. I looked at the way as your little shadow frog hopped from shadow to shadow to shadow, and I thought this game looks delightful. So it was a big disappointment to me when SCHiM doesn't expand out from that. The artwork of its single color aesthetic with its shadows and its lines placed in this 3D world does look gorgeous. It has a simplicity and a cleanness to it that is just delightful to watch. That linked in with its animations makes this game easy to watch, easy to see, delightful to experience. So the opening moments of this game do feel exquisite. As you start to pick up the mechanics of hopping from shadow to shadow to shadow, you start to integrate yourself to this unique world with the SCHiM, your little frog shadow. It has a soundtrack to delight, full of a various array of cozy music, something that makes you feel warm inside, something that makes you feel safe. And they are the highlights of this game. The art, the animation, the music. Without a word of dialogue, SCHiM portrays a story that solidifies your connection to a person. And when that connection is broken, you naturally want to reconnect. But in some ways, frustratingly so. You know your objective through this game. Carry on the journey with your human through thick and thin, through good times, through bad. But be there for them. Be the shadow. But it fails on some of the execution to this, where in some levels, the story that it has portrayed of you chasing down your human falls flat as I'm looking at my human in the distance thinking, I could jump right now and reach them. I can see a pathway to the human that would work, but at the last minute they walk away. Something happens, an environmental change that stops you from reconnecting, from reaching your goal, and that can be frustrating. When the goal is not out of reach because of a puzzle or a story beat, but out of reach because that one object just so happened to not have a shadow on it. And it really took me out of that narrative, out of that storytelling a little bit. But these are games. This isn't a movie or a book or an illustration. And a game needs to bring together the art, the animation, the music, the story, and the interactions with the world. And I think that's something SCHiM really falls flat on. Even though the game feels responsive and crisp, it struggled with creating a road forward. Objectives sometimes being ambiguous didn't necessarily lead to confusion, but frustration. The absence of UI in SCHiM makes it grounded in this environment that they've created, but also leaves objectives ambiguous. They give you a direction to head towards, but often I found myself at that objective point, jumping onto different shadows, not connecting with the right thing, because the actual final objective didn't make sense in the progression of the story, but also wasn't highlighted in a concise way in a UI element or an environmental element. And when you have a game that looks this cozy and feels this comforting, that can be a letdown. Once again, ripping you out of the immersion that the soundtrack leads you into. Some aspects of the story were more supernatural than others and did lead to confusion with your end goal. And there are parts in the game that I just sat there and thought, why did I just not reconnect there? Why did this happen to my human? But there are moments that the game shines. There are moments when you nail a jump to a jump to a jump, going from shadow to shadow to shadow. It makes you feel like you've nailed it. The sound design of when you hit a shadow, when you make a jump, really embeds the achievement that you have accomplished this jump. And when you get into a flow, the sound design, the art style, the animations really comes together to put a smile on your face. And these are the moments where the game shines. There are a few areas in the game where they start to add in interactions, but I don't think the game ever goes far enough with it. There isn't a consistency to the progression, to the evolution of the level design. There are several ways of interacting with objects, and those interactions with those objects stay the same throughout the game. It could be using a sign to leap long distances. It could be interacting with an object to make it move in a specific direction. It could be turning a light on to create new shadows for you to progress through. And all these things are really good ideas. But the issue is that on some levels early on, these interactions are done superbly. And you start to get a feeling of how to move through a level, how to move through the world, and how this game is going to be set out for the next few levels to drop those ideas completely and leave you just jumping from shadow to shadow to shadow. And it's jarring. The evolution of the level design doesn't build up into a crescendo of all the things you've learned. In a lot of platformers, there is a progression of what your character has learned, and then using what you have learned to progress through the game, to move forward. And a game like Gree really nails this. You take what you learn early on in the game to acquire new abilities to then progress through the game even further, using these new tools and using the level design you have learned previously to really push forward in your journey. And that is what splits a game like Gree and SCHiM apart. SCHiM has the art style, it has the music, it has the storytelling, but what it doesn't have is that progression. When you teach a player a tool, when you teach a player interaction, that interaction needs to be progressed forward and then added upon to make it so the player is consistently engaged in your platformer. And early on, SCHiM does feel like it's starting to do that, using tools, using interactions inside the environment to change where shadows are placed so that you can progress forward. One of the standout levels is the factory level, using forklifts to move shadows, using drones to fly in specific areas, interacting with objects to leap great distances, and timing environmental obstacles to help you progress to the next part of the level. It is quite possibly one of the best levels in the game. But then following this spectacle of a level, you never get the same level of interaction moving forward. You go from this interactivity of the factory level, where you're using environments and your knowledge of what the game has taught you previously. And then the next few levels will be very short and might just be jumping from place to place to place. I feel like a lot of the levels in SCHiM are filler. And that's one of the biggest disappointments to me. The number of times I felt like the story was artificially extended instead of having this natural flow to it really took me out of the experience. And for £20.99 or your regional equivalent, it's a lot to ask. This game lasted about 3 hours. And when I finished the game, I really did felt like, oh, is that it? I feel like that is quite a bit of money for the experience. What this game does wrong, a game like Gree does right. And that game is £13. And Gree is a slightly shorter experience. It's about 2 hours long. But I never once finished that game thinking, well, I can't believe this cost this much. I finished that game with a moment of silence. I sat at my desk and I didn't really know what to say. It was an experience that I have never had before. The difference is that SCHiM never gave me the satisfaction of that level evolution. Every time I started a level, I had a feeling that this was either going to be a hit or a miss. The factory level had set such a high precedent on how levels in this game could be that the next 2 hours after that really just fell short. But after finishing the game, it's not worth £20. But I would love for the studio to keep pushing forward with their design. And I would like them to experiment with this idea of level design evolution. Maybe taking SCHiM and chopping it up and saying, okay, we'll start off with a basic set of jumps and we'll move into some basic interactions. And we'll keep this flow forward, building up from level to level to level to see what they could actually achieve. They have the art, they have the music, they have the animations. It's just the evolution. So my conclusion is no, I don't think this is worth the money, and I don't suggest you play it. What I suggest is you go and play a game like Gree. And I hope that the studio's next game can be something I can look at and be like, wow, I'm not sure what to say, because that was as magic as Gree. Thanks everyone for watching. If you like this video, hit the like, subscribe buttons, and I'll see you next time.